Hello and welcome back to Simple Times Studios, where we recount epic solo campaigns through various independent settings and games for your entertainment. Today we will be starting our Obojima campaign in earnest and following Warden's mail route as he navigates a part of the island of Obojima. The city of Yatamon had already begun to buzz with activity by the time the sun finished rising. Bakers and metalworkers had already begun to stoke the fires of their ovens and furnaces. Ancient electrical street lamps flickered off as the ethereal spirits that nested in them during the night rose to wander through Yatamon's streets. And the Courier Brigade headquarters building in the heart of the city was busy with the thrum of staff sorting mail, filling bags, and issuing assignments. Warden adjusted his Courier Brigade cap nervously as he walked through the crowded halls towards the assignment room. Today was the day he was supposed to be assigned his route and the team he would be working with. Okay. Does anything happen to him on his way to the assignment room? I give it a 50-50, and 83 says no. He just gets to the room. The assignment room was a small briefing room that normally had a duty officer and a trio of brigade members to be briefed on an assignment or on their route. Yet when Warden walked in, only the duty officer, an officious human male in a pressed uniform, was there. Warden looked around. Had he arrived late for his assignment? He could have sworn he was on time, if not early. Still, where was the rest of his team then? Courier Warden reporting for assignment, sir, Warden greeted as he entered the room. Ah, good. You're early. Here's your assigned route. Your mailbag is in the vault. And you leave at once. Any questions? The lieutenant in charge of assignments replied briskly as he handed Warden a map and a slip of paper to pick up his mailbag. Warden looked around. The room was still empty. Where is the rest of my party? Aren't we supposed to be assigned in groups of 3? The nameless lieutenant sighed. The earthquake that hit the entire island a week ago also created a massive tidal wave that hit the entire eastern side of the island. Most of the Courier Brigade is out on assignment to clear roads and re-establish contact with the villages on that side of the island. There isn't anyone else to spare on low-risk routes like the Gift of Shiratashi. We also can't spare any more equipment than you were already issued. Hopefully that will change once the other branches make some progress on reconnecting the eastern coast, as I do not like this any more than you do. Still, you have your assignment. Deliverance through delivery, Courier, the assignment officer explained before dismissing him with a nod. Deliverance through delivery, Warden replied and saluted before leaving the room. He was dismissed. Might as well get started. The vault was down the hall from the assignment room. During the forgotten first age of the island, the brigade headquarters had been a major bank for the city of Yatamon. The bank's old vault was perhaps the last major evidence of this former use, as the Courier Brigade used it for much the same purpose, safely storing sorted mail until it could be picked up by outgoing postal knights and couriers. The vault was a flurry of activity, with clerks pushing carts of mail and parcels from the various sorting rooms throughout the headquarters building into the vault for safekeeping until it could be sent on its way. Warden approached the nearest free vault teller and presented the paper slip he had been given for his mailbag. Without a word, the clerk reached behind the counter and pulled out a massive leather satchel with arcane runes stitched into the bag. This was Warden's mailbag. Warden picked it up and struggled with the unexpected weight. It was definitely heavier than it looked as he slung it over his shoulder. As he left the Courier Brigade headquarters, he checked his gear one last time. Sword was sheathed, crossbow was unstrung and slung over his shoulder next to his mailbag and backpack. His shield was strapped over his left forearm, and the rest of his gear was stuffed away in his backpack. He was as ready as he was ever going to be. Walking through Yatamon as he made his way to the city limits, Warden let the sounds and sights wash over him. Even after living in Yatamon for a few years as he trained to become a knight aspirant of the Courier Brigade, the city still did not run out of ways to shock him. If he could pick a single word to describe the city, it would have to be contradiction, as the city was a series of contradictions that shouldn't be. The buildings and streets of Yatamon were built ages ago using fabulous materials like asphalt and concrete that modern inhabitants of Obojima lost the knowledge to create. Magic woven into the city's infrastructure by its original builders kept everything from the buildings to the plumbing in good repair. Rumors were abound that the magic that kept the city in perfect condition was fading, but Warden wasn't sure if there was any truth to the stories. Other artifacts of the First Age were brought back to life by a combination of magic and ingenuity, their use in full display as Warden walked on. A herbalist from one of the witch covens sold potions from the back of an electric K-style pickup truck brought back to life through lightning magic. A bright red vending machine stocked with alchemic ingredients and strange knickknacks hummed happily with electricity. A tabby cat sat on top and watched pedestrians walk by with an unnatural intelligence. Music from a record player someone coaxed back to life filled the air. It was all completely alien to Warden, even living in the city as long as he already had. Nothing like this existed in his home village or in any of the neighboring farming villages. And then he passed through the Circle. The Circle was the informal name for perhaps the strangest part of Yatamon's geography. Within the Circle, the preservation magic that kept Yatamon in perfect order was still strong. Outside, it faded. The streets were cracked and full of potholes, the buildings were run down, and some buildings had even started to collapse. In this magicless part of the city, Yatamon wasn't so much dangerous as it was empty. There was still danger. Stories of explorers getting trapped inside collapsing buildings was a common tale, but most of the eeriness came from how empty the outer city was. Warden continued to walk along until the city limits were finally behind him before he pulled out a weathered map from his training days. The route was simple. Start at Yatamon, head along the coast until he arrived at Tidewater, then head inward toward Okari Village, before finally completing the first half of the route at Matango Village in the foothills beneath Mount Abora, before making his way back along the same route once he completed all of his deliveries at Matango. Simple but long, and his old pocket map was marked with a number of shortcuts that should hopefully speed things up. Okay, Warden is going to make a survival check to find a route that would take him to Tidewater. He gets an unnatural 20 on a 1d20 plus 4, and it's a well-established route, so it shouldn't be too hard to find a few shortcuts that will shave some time off of his trip. Folding his map back up and tucking it away in his pocket, he started walking down the well-worn dirt road towards the settlement of Tidewater as the midday sun shined brightly overhead. It wasn't a particularly long trek, and he knew a few shortcuts that should save him a day or two overall, provided he didn't encounter any other mishaps. Alright, we're going to fudge some rules to generate what happens on the trip from Yatamon to Tidewater. Warden will make it to Tidewater in 6 encounters, since he rolled so well on his survival check. And to keep this episode from getting too long, I'm going to say he cuts that down to 3. The dusty brown dirt road cut a wide, winding path through the coastal grasslands on the road to Tidewater. Warden walked along, watching for danger, as he knew he was on his own if he got into trouble too far from town. Does Warden encounter anything so far as he follows the road to Tidewater? I give it a 50-50, and 37 says yes. I'm going to roll a d12 on the Wandering Encounters table, and 9. I encounter a female merchant grumbling about her wagon getting a broken wheel. "Oh, of all the times to break on me, it has to be now?" A female voice grumbled loudly further down the road as Warden walked closer. Rounding the bend in the road, the wandering courier came across an elf woman fussing with a wagon with a broken wheel. A pile of root vegetables had spilled onto the road as the stranded merchant slowly replaced the broken wheel with a spare one. "I'm almost to Yatamon. Why couldn't it hold just a little longer?" She fumed as Warden came closer. "Need some help?" he asked cautiously. He had heard stories about bandits pretending to be stranded travelers to try and ambush and rob good-natured people. "Okay, is this a trick to try and rob Warden? I think it's unlikely, given that he's still fairly close to civilization." And 49 says no, so he's safe for now. The merchant looked up as she finished rolling the spare wheel over to the broken one. "A postal knight? Thanks. Can you lift this up long enough for me to change the wheels? I think I emptied the cart out enough that it shouldn't be too heavy." Warden nodded and moved to lift up the wagon while the other travelers swapped wheels. Okay. Warden's going to make an athletics check, a 1d20 plus 5 to help her. He gets an 8. I'm going to say he does it, but he slips on some mud or a stray vegetable. Grunting and feeling his muscles ache from the effort, Warden lifted up the wagon just high enough to complete the repair. The moment the wheel was swapped, he let go and stepped back. His boot stepped on a particularly large carrot, and he lost his footing before landing ungracefully in the pile of spilled vegetables. The elven merchant laughed and reached out to help him back up. "Thanks. Never met a courier that couldn't keep his footing." Warden regained his footing and dusted himself off. "Name's Warden. I'm on my way to Tidewater to deliver mail," he began, introducing himself. "Lilac," she answered in turn. "I'm heading to Yatamon to sell my vegetables." The two of them traded news before parting ways. Warden continued to follow the road to Tidewater while Lilac took her cart into Yatamon. Okay. Does Warden have another encounter? I give it a 50-50 since it's right after the last one. 71 says no. Warden continued to follow the dirt road before veering off inland through the grassy plains, walking along a narrow hunting trail that took him through a dense field. Waist-high grass flanked him on either side as he walked on. The sun slowly crept along its own trek in the sky as the errant courier walked along. By the time the trail had intersected back with the main road, he would have shaved a few hours off of his trip. Nothing happened, nothing ambushed him. It was just him and the natural sounds of the grassland as the wind blew through his short black hair. Okay. Does he have an encounter now? Okay, I think it's likely given how we're halfway between towns at this point, and 31 says yes. I get a 2 on the encounters table. I have a Yokario ambush on my hands with 4 Yokario getting the jump on me. Yet it was not to last. He had just cleared the thick grassland to return to the coastal road when he heard it. A loud, repetitive beat filled the air, a percussive thrum that sounded vaguely like music, before 4 small figures leapt out of the grass with a loud screech and surrounded him on all sides. Warden could sense that there were 4 of them, all of them Yokario, from the sound of it. It always was Yokario. The lead Yokario was a feathery green and maroon creature with big orange and yellow eyes, typical of its species. It hoisted up a drum mallet almost as big as it was and pointed the object towards Warden like it was a weapon. "You! Big fellow! You no pass unless you pay!" "Pay! Pay! Pay!" the other three shouted in unison. Sure enough, there was one on each side of him. Warden's hand started to drift towards his sword ever so slightly. "Pay with what?" he asked. His mind was almost made up on how to handle these four, but part of him wanted to humor them. Yokario were a common pest in the region of the gift, but dealing with them would slow him down. "You pay 30 gold or you pay with song," the Yokario bandit replied, unknowingly signing his own doom. Warden nodded contemplatively. He only had 21 gold flowers to his name, he couldn't sing a tune to save his life, and he was already running out of patience for these novice bandits. Quickly drawing his sword with a metallic swing, he raised his shield. "I choose to pay with violence." Okay, and now we roll for initiative. Warden gets a 19 on his initiative, and the Yokario bandits get a 9. Guess they really weren't expecting that. All four Yokario reflexively jumped back. Briefly stunned, their intimidation did not work. Warden seized his opening and moved forward to attack the leader. If the boldest of his opponents fell, the others might break and run. Okay, Warden moves forward and swings to strike the lead Yokario with his sword. He gets a 17 and does 9 points of damage. The leader has 5 HP left. I'll have him make a wisdom save to avoid panicking, because Warden did just vaporize more than half of the goblin-like creature's health. And a 13. I'm going to say that the leader is shaken. Warden will end his turn raising his shield and guarding against the one to his right as a bonus action. That ends his turn. Warden's blade struck true, splattering blood against the dirt road as it bit deep into the Yokarios in charge of this ambush. The small creature's already large eyes went wider as pain shot through his body and shattered his commitment to robbing random travelers on the road. Seeing that the leader would likely bolt, Warden turned around and raised his shield towards the opponent on his right. Okay, now it's the Yokario's turn. The leader uses his actions to disengage and then run as fast as he can while his cohorts attack Warden, though they're not doing much better morale-wise. 22, 18, and 13. He takes 8 points of damage from the 2 that hit. He has 4 HP left. Already battered, the ambush leader stepped back, then ran as fast as he could. "You three get him! Beat him!" The wounded Yokario shouted over his shoulder and continued to run, bloodlust and embarrassment overriding sense. The other three charged to strike the armed courier in unison. Hitting with the practiced precision of a trio of drummers, 2 struck true with an almost musical beat, while the third drum hammer struck Warden's shield with a percussive clang. Jolts of pain radiated through his torso and thigh as he struggled to keep his ground. Okay, Warden's turn again. He strikes the one that scored the first hit on him, and narrowly misses with a 13, but gains a luck token for his trouble. He's still guarded against the same Yokario to his right. Warden swung his blade a second time, narrowly missing the maroon-feathered plumage of his target and clipping a single errant feather off of its head. Despite pain shooting through his body, he kept his guard up. If he was going to go down, then he was going to go down swinging violently. Okay, the Yokario's turn again. The leader is now long gone. Are the others motivated to flee as well? They get a 12 on their shared will save. Their boss is gone and Warden is not going down despite their best efforts. They break and run. The lead Yokario's voice was barely audible over the sound of combat as the other three bandits considered their options. Warden's capacity for violence clearly rattled all of them. All of them were clearly expecting him to cower and comply. Striking their leader and holding his own against them was not something they planned for. Finally, uncertainty got the better of his foes. "Forget this stubborn big one! Run after boss!" one of the three creatures shouted before they all scattered back into the tall grass that they came from. The battle over, Warden exhaled and cleaned his sword before returning it to its sheath. That was embarrassingly close. He had forgotten that Yokarios could chain their attacks together into a perverse drum line, and that was not how he wished to be reminded. Dusting himself off and ignoring the painful bruises forming on his thighs and torso, the armored mailman resumed his trek towards Tidewater. Despite walking much more stiffly from his injuries, he managed to make it to Tidewater before nightfall. Walking around the last bend in the road, the welcome sight of Tidewater came into view. He had made it. Okay, next episode, Warden will level up to level 2 and drop off the village's mail, and hopefully not get too entangled in Tidewater's unique eccentricities before continuing on his route. Rather than just blindly pick, I will use Game Geek's numerology oracle, then reference what the Obojima book has written on Tidewater for ideas. I get 3 1s and 3 3s. So whatever is here is very, very strong. 1 symbolizes origins and beginnings. 3, according to Gigi's very abridged guide to numerology, 3 symbolizes a whole bunch of things, but collaboration and communication seem to stand out. So whatever happens here is likely to stretch across the entire solo campaign, involve a communication separate from his original mail route. None of the established adventure hooks for Tidewater in the Obojima book really fit that, but I have a few other ideas. End of episode. See you next time.